The crystal chandelier cast harsh shadows across the mahogany conference table as Sophia Grant stood in her crisp white server's uniform, holding a tray of champagne. Around her, Manhattan's elite toasted a $2.8 billion merger that would crush thousands of small businesses, including her family's struggling textile company that had supplied this very corporation for 20 years. "Excuse me." Alexander Vaughn, heir to the Vaughn empire, barely glanced up from his phone. "You're not worth my time. Just refill the glasses and disappear." The room fell silent. Sophia's grip tightened on the serving tray, her mother's silver locket catching the light, the only thing left from their old life. She had 37 minutes before the deal closed. 37 minutes to destroy the man who had no idea he was talking to the ghost he'd created. "Of course, Mr. Vaughn," she said quietly. "Right away." The 68th floor of the Vaughn Tower hummed with the kind of quiet power that only billion-dollar deals could generate. Sophia Grant moved through the conference room like a shadow, her practiced smile never wavering as she navigated between leather chairs worth more than most people's monthly salaries. The merger documents spread across the table told a story that would reshape the entire textile industry and destroy what remained of her family's legacy in the process. She had trained for this moment for 2 years, perfecting the art of invisibility while standing in plain sight, and now every carefully rehearsed movement brought her closer to the revenge that had consumed her dreams since the day they threw her out of this very building. Alexander Vaughn commanded the room from his position at the head of the table, his designer suit tailored to perfection and his voice carrying the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no. He gestured dismissively at the stack of contracts, his Rolex catching the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Central Park. "The Grant Textiles acquisition is a minor detail in the broader portfolio restructuring," he announced to the assembled board members, each word delivered with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Once we absorb their remaining assets and liquidate the manufacturing facilities, we'll see a 12% increase in quarterly profits." Sophia's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as she refilled his champagne glass, the sound of her family's name spoken so carelessly hitting her like a physical blow. The silver locket at her throat seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment, its weight a constant reminder of promises made and debts owed. Where others in this room saw dollar signs and market share, Sophia saw faces. Her father's weathered hands working the looms until midnight, her mother's proud smile the day they landed their first major contract with Vaughn Corporation, the tears in her younger brother's eyes when they lost the house. She had been barely 22 when she first walked these halls as William Hayes's executive assistant, believing that hard work and loyalty meant something in the corporate world. 3 years ago, when Hayes died in that convenient car accident just days before he planned to expose Alexander's illegal activities, she learned how naive she had been. The official story painted it as a tragic mishap, but Sophia knew better. She had seen the evidence Hayes was gathering, the late-night meetings, the fear in his eyes those final weeks. Alexander's phone buzzed against the mahogany surface, and he glanced at it with the same dismissive attention he showed everything else in his world. "Gentlemen, I trust you'll handle the remaining paperwork," he said, rising from his chair with fluid grace. "I have a dinner engagement that actually matters." The board members chuckled at his casual cruelty, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceiling like vultures circling carrion. Sophia watched them through lowered lashes as she collected empty glasses, memorizing faces and filing away overheard conversations with the methodical precision of someone building a case. These men had built their fortunes on the bones of companies like hers, small family businesses that represented generations of American craftsmanship ground into dust beneath the wheels of corporate greed. As the executives filed out, chattering about stock options and golden parachutes, Sophia remained behind to clean up the remnants of their celebration. Her movements were deliberately slow and methodical, giving her time to photograph the documents they had carelessly left scattered across the table. The merger agreements contained details that would fascinate the Securities and Exchange Commission. Backdated contracts, falsified environmental impact reports, and financial projections that bordered on fraud. Each click of her phone's camera felt like loading bullets into a gun she had been crafting for 2 years, ever since the day she walked out of this building with nothing but a cardboard box and a burning desire for justice. The silver locket caught the light again as she bent over the table, and for a moment she could almost hear her mother's voice whispering that some battles were worth fighting, no matter the cost. Alexander paused in the doorway, his reflection caught in the polished surface of the conference table like a predator surveying his territory. "Make sure those documents are filed properly," he called over his shoulder, not bothering to turn around. "We can't afford any mistakes with a deal this size." His words carried an undertone of menace that sent chills down Sophia's spine, a reminder of what happened to people who crossed the Vaughn family. She nodded respectfully, playing the part of the dutiful servant while her mind calculated the time remaining until the market closed. 34 minutes to gather the evidence she needed, transfer it to the right people, and disappear before anyone realized what had happened. The game was already in motion, pieces moving across a board that Alexander didn't even know existed. The conference room fell silent except for the whisper of air conditioning and the distant hum of traffic 68 floors below. Sophia pulled out her phone and began photographing the documents with practiced efficiency, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Each image represented hours of meticulous planning, months of careful observation, and years of patient suffering. The silver locket seemed to pulse against her chest like a second heartbeat, its hidden contents more valuable than anything in this opulent room. She thought of her family's textile mill, shuttered and sold for scrap metal, of her father's broken spirit and her mother's fading photographs. Justice had been a long time coming, but it was finally within reach, and she would not let this opportunity slip through her fingers like so many dreams before it. From her pocket, she retrieved a small electronic device no bigger than a thumb drive, its innocent appearance belying its devastating potential. The virus contained within would lie dormant in Vaughn Corporation's servers until activated remotely, at which point it would begin systematically corrupting backup files and financial records. It was a digital time bomb crafted by someone who understood that the greatest weapons in modern warfare were lines of code rather than bullets. As she approached Alexander's abandoned laptop, still logged into the company's secure network, Sophia felt a surge of satisfaction that went deeper than mere revenge. This was about restoring balance to a world that had forgotten the value of integrity, about proving that even the most powerful predators could be brought low by someone they never saw coming. The game was about to change, and this time, she would be the one writing the rules. The basement levels of Vaughn Tower housed the company's data center, a sterile maze of humming servers and blinking lights that most employees never bothered to visit. Sophia descended the service elevator with a cleaning cart, her uniform granting her the kind of invisibility that wealth afforded. Servants were meant to be seen but never remembered. Her employee badge, hastily reprinted with a false identity, beeped softly as she swiped through each security checkpoint, the sound barely audible above the mechanical whir of cooling systems. 3 years ago, she had walked these same corridors as someone who mattered, someone whose opinions were sought and whose intelligence was valued. Now she was just another working-class ghost haunting the margins of power, exactly where she needed to be to complete her mission. The main server room stretched before her like a technological cathedral, its walls lined with towers of processing power that contained the digital lifeblood of Alexander's empire. Every transaction, every contract, every dirty deal flowed through these machines in streams of data that most people couldn't even comprehend. But Sophia had spent 18 months learning to speak their language, studying cybersecurity protocols and network architecture until she could navigate corporate firewalls like a native. She approached Terminal 7 with practiced confidence, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she accessed systems that should have been impossible to breach. The USB device slid into the port with a soft click, its payload immediately beginning to spread through the network like a virus designed to expose rather than destroy. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission, confirming receipt of the documents she had transmitted earlier. The evidence would take time to process and verify, but the wheels of federal investigation were already beginning to turn. Alexander's merger would proceed as planned, giving him a false sense of security while investigators quietly built their case in the shadows. Sophia smiled grimly as she watched lines of code scroll across the monitor, each command another nail in the coffin she was building for the man who had destroyed her family. The digital breadcrumbs she was leaving would lead investigators straight to the heart of Vaughn Corporation's illegal activities, creating a paper trail that not even the best lawyers money could buy could explain away. Movement in the corridor outside caught her attention, and she quickly minimized the terminal window while pretending to dust the server racks. Alexander himself appeared in the doorway, his presence unexpected and unwelcome in this technological dungeon beneath his corporate kingdom. He moved with the restless energy of a predator sensing something wrong in his territory, his eyes scanning the room with suspicion that made Sophia's pulse quicken. "What are you doing down here?" he demanded, his voice carrying an edge that suggested this was more than casual curiosity. His designer suit looked out of place among the utilitarian surroundings, like a peacock that had wandered into a garage, but there was nothing comical about the cold intelligence in his eyes. Sophia maintained her submissive posture while her mind raced through possible explanations for her presence in the server room. "Quarterly deep cleaning, sir?" she replied with practiced deference, gesturing toward her cart of supplies. "Building management scheduled us to work overnight in the technical areas." The lie came easily, supported by forged work orders she had prepared weeks in advance, and she watched Alexander's expression for any sign that he suspected deception. His gaze lingered on her face longer than necessary, and for a terrifying moment she wondered if some subconscious part of him recognized the young woman who had once sat across from him in board meetings, taking notes and offering insights he had dismissed without consideration. The years had changed her. Stress and determination had sharpened her features while working multiple jobs had hardened her body, but the eyes remained the same. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, broken only by the electronic symphony of the server room and the distant vibration of the building's infrastructure. Alexander's phone rang, shattering the tension with a generic corporate ringtone that seemed absurdly mundane in the moment. He answered without taking his eyes off Sophia, his voice shifting into the smooth tones of a man accustomed to managing crises. "Yes, I'm aware of the security breach," he said, confirming what she had suspected. Her activities had not gone completely unnoticed. "Bring in the consultants immediately. I want every system swept and every access point monitored." The call ended with a sharp click, and his attention returned to her with renewed intensity that made her skin crawl. Without warning, he stepped closer, invading her personal space with the casual aggression of someone accustomed to intimidating subordinates. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with something darker, a predatory musk that reminded her of the night William Hayes died, and she realized how far Alexander would go to protect his secrets. "You seem familiar," he said softly, his voice carrying undertones that made her stomach clench with remembered fear. "Have we met before?" The question hung in the air like a blade, and Sophia forced herself to meet his gaze with the blank incomprehension of someone whose existence barely registered in his world. The silver locket felt burning hot against her chest, its hidden contents a reminder of why she was willing to risk everything for this moment of reckoning. She shook her head with carefully practiced confusion, allowing a hint of nervous laughter to color her voice. "I don't think so, sir. I'm just temporary staff from the cleaning company." The performance was letter perfect, honed through months of preparation and motivated by years of suppressed rage, and she watched him gradually lose interest as her apparent ordinariness reasserted itself. Alexander was a man who noticed only what served his purposes, and minimum wage workers fell outside his sphere of attention unless they posed a direct threat. The irony was exquisite. His own arrogance had rendered him blind to the danger standing directly in front of him, close enough to destroy everything he had built if she chose to reveal herself. But patience was a virtue she had learned the hard way, and the game was far from over. The Starbucks on Lexington Avenue buzzed with the familiar chaos of morning rush hour, a symphony of grinding espresso machines and urgent conversations that provided perfect cover for clandestine meetings. Sophia sat in a corner booth, her laptop screen reflecting the faces of commuters streaming past rain-streaked windows while she monitored the chaos unfolding within Vaughn Corporation's digital infrastructure. The virus she had planted was working exactly as designed, corrupting backup files while creating phantom access logs that would lead investigators to conclude the breach came from outside sources. Every few minutes, her secure messaging app pinged with updates from contacts throughout the financial district, a network of disgruntled employees and ethical whistleblowers who shared her hunger for justice against corporate predators who believed themselves untouchable. Her phone vibrated with an incoming call from Ryan Ellis, the private investigator Alexander had hired to find the mysterious hacker threatening his empire. The irony was delicious. Ryan had been her closest friend during those terrible months after William Hayes's death, one of the few people who believed her theories about the convenient timing of the car accident. Now he was officially working for her enemy while secretly feeding her intelligence about Alexander's countermeasures, a double agent whose allegiance to justice trumped his professional obligations. "They're bringing in serious cybersecurity contractors." Ryan's voice crackled through her encrypted earpiece, barely audible above the coffee shop's ambient noise. "Federal-level expertise, the kind of people who usually work terrorism cases. You need to be careful, Sophie." The warning sent a chill down her spine, but she forced herself to maintain the appearance of casual browsing while her fingers flew across the keyboard. The FBI's cybercrime division was legendary for their ability to trace even the most sophisticated digital footprints, and she had no illusions about her ability to evade their scrutiny indefinitely. Her advantage lay in misdirection rather than concealment. By the time they unraveled the true scope of her activities, the evidence against Alexander would be public record and her mission would be complete. The silver locket seemed to grow heavier against her chest as she remembered William Hayes' final words, whispered in the hospital room where he died from injuries that were anything but accidental. He had made her promise to finish what he started, to expose the corruption that had turned Vaughn Corporation into a criminal enterprise masquerading as legitimate business. A commotion outside drew her attention to the street, where a convoy of black SUVs was pulling up to the Vaughn Tower with the kind of precision that suggested federal involvement. Through the scope of her laptop's camera, activated remotely through the building's security system, she watched armed agents in tactical gear streaming into the lobby, while executives scrambled to understand what was happening. The Securities and Exchange Commission had moved faster than she anticipated, converting her leaked documents into search warrants with impressive efficiency. Alexander appeared on her screen, his usually composed demeanor cracking as he realized the magnitude of the threat facing his empire. For the first time in 3 years, Sophia allowed herself a smile of genuine satisfaction, savoring the sight of fear in the eyes of a man who had never known vulnerability. The federal raid was proceeding exactly as she had hoped, creating maximum disruption while establishing an official investigation that would be impossible for Alexander to suppress through his usual channels of political influence. Her laptop displayed feeds from security cameras throughout the building, offering a god's eye view of the chaos as agents systematically gathered evidence from every department. The timing was crucial. She needed the investigation to gain momentum before Alexander could implement the scorched earth protocols she knew he would resort to when cornered. Men like him didn't surrender gracefully, and she had no doubt he would attempt to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses rather than face the consequences of his actions. The game was entering its most dangerous phase, where miscalculation could prove fatal for anyone who threatened his survival. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, the kind of communication that made her blood run cold with recognition. "I know who you are, Sophia Grant." The text read, each word carefully chosen to maximize psychological impact. "Meet me in Hayes's old office at 8 tonight, or I start eliminating the people you care about." The message was unsigned, but she knew it came from Alexander himself. Only he would have the arrogance to reference William Hayes while making threats, and only he would be desperate enough to resort to blackmail when his empire began crumbling. The fact that he had discovered her true identity meant her time was running out faster than anticipated, but it also presented an opportunity she hadn't dared hope for. If he was willing to meet face to face, it meant he was more frightened than angry, more desperate for answers than confident in his power. The rain intensified outside, turning Lexington Avenue into a river of umbrellas and hunched shoulders that reflected her own growing sense of isolation. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment, and she could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. The silver locket contained more than sentimental value. Hidden within its antique metalwork was a micro SD card containing William Hayes's complete files on Alexander's criminal activities, evidence so damning that its release would trigger congressional investigations and federal prosecutions that could reach the highest levels of government. She had carried her mentor's legacy against her heart for 3 years, waiting for the perfect moment to honor his memory with justice rather than mere revenge. Her reflection in the laptop screen showed a woman transformed by purpose and hardened by loss. No longer the naive young professional who had believed corporate loyalty meant anything to men like Alexander Vaughn. The frightened girl who had been escorted from the building by security guards had evolved into something far more dangerous. A ghost with access to digital weapons and the knowledge to wield them with surgical precision. As she closed the laptop and prepared for the confrontation that would determine both their fates, Sophia Grant allowed herself one final moment to remember the woman her mother had been, the dreams her family had pursued, and the promise she had made to a dying man who believed justice was worth any sacrifice. The reckoning was at hand, and she intended to make it memorable. Federal agents continued to stream into the Vaughn Tower as she gathered her belongings, their presence a visible reminder that even the most powerful predators could be brought low by evidence and determination. Alexander's empire was beginning to crumble, and she was the architect of its destruction, a digital ghost who had haunted his systems until they collapsed under the weight of their own corruption. Tonight would bring the final confrontation, a meeting between the woman he had underestimated and the man who had forgotten that some debts could never be forgiven. The silver locket pulsed against her chest like a second heartbeat, carrying secrets that would reshape the American corporate landscape and prove that sometimes the meek really could inherit the earth, even if they had to burn down a few towers in the process. The evening news painted a picture of chaos at Vaughn Corporation as federal investigators carted away boxes of evidence while stock prices plummeted in after-hours trading. Sophia watched the coverage from the safety of her cramped studio apartment, its second-hand furniture and peeling wallpaper a stark reminder of how far her family had fallen since Alexander destroyed their textile business. Every channel carried the same story, a massive securities fraud investigation that threatened to topple one of America's most prominent corporate dynasties, though none of the reporters understood they were witnessing the culmination of a 3-year campaign orchestrated by a woman the world had forgotten. Her laptop displayed real-time market data showing Vaughn Corporation's stock in free fall, each percentage point of decline representing millions of dollars in paper losses that would soon become very real consequences for investors who had trusted Alexander's carefully crafted public image. The secure phone Ryan Ellis had given her buzzed with an encrypted message containing surveillance photos from inside Vaughn Tower, images that confirmed Alexander was in full damage control mode. The pictures showed him huddled with his legal team, their faces grim as they calculated the cost of defending against federal charges that grew more serious with each hour. Corporate crisis management was a specialized art form that Alexander had mastered over the years, but the evidence Sophia had provided investigators was too comprehensive to dismiss or explain away. Financial records going back 5 years painted a clear picture of systematic fraud, market manipulation, and conspiracy to commit securities violations that would result in decades of federal prison time if proven in court. The irony was perfect. Alexander's own meticulous record-keeping, designed to protect him from business rivals and regulatory oversight, had become the instrument of his destruction. Her reflection in the apartment's single window showed a woman who had been transformed by purpose and hardened by loss. No longer recognizable as the eager young professional who had once believed hard work would be rewarded with loyalty. The silver locket caught the streetlight's glow as she moved through the cramped space, its hidden contents more valuable than all of Alexander's wealth because they represented something he had never understood: the power of truth wielded by someone with nothing left to lose. William Hayes had died believing that justice was possible in a system corrupted by money and influence, and she intended to prove his faith was justified even if it cost her everything she had left. The game had moved beyond personal revenge into something larger, a reckoning that would send shockwaves through boardrooms across the country and remind corporate predators that their actions had consequences. Alexander's text message had specified William Hayes's old office as the meeting location, a choice that revealed either profound arrogance or psychological manipulation of the highest order. The office had remained untouched since Hayes's death, preserved like a shrine to corporate respectability, while serving as a constant reminder of what happened to executives who developed inconvenient consciences. Sophia had avoided that floor of the building during her months of infiltration, unable to bear the thought of seeing her mentor's personal effects gathering dust while his killer prospered. Tonight, she would return not as a grieving subordinate, but as an agent of justice, armed with evidence that would complete the work Hayes had died trying to finish. The symmetry was almost poetic. The place where her old life had ended would become the birthplace of her new identity as the woman who brought down Alexander Vaughn. Her laptop chimed with an incoming video call from Ryan Ellis, his face appearing on screen against a backdrop of rain-streaked windows that suggested he was calling from his car. "The feds are moving faster than anyone expected," he reported, his voice tight with the kind of professional concern that came from years of investigating corporate crime. "They've already identified 3 shell companies and 2 offshore accounts that tie directly to Alexander's personal finances. Whatever evidence you gave them, it's solid enough to convince federal prosecutors they can win at trial." The news should have filled her with satisfaction, but instead she felt only the hollow ache of a mission nearing completion without bringing the closure she had hoped to find. Justice was a cold comfort compared to the warmth of family bonds that Alexander had severed when he destroyed her father's business and drove her mother to an early grave. The rain outside intensified, turning the city into an impressionistic blur of neon and shadow that matched her conflicted emotional state. Victory was within reach, but the cost had been enormous. 3 years of her life consumed by the pursuit of revenge. Relationships abandoned and opportunities missed because nothing mattered more than seeing Alexander Vaughn face consequences for his actions. She thought of her younger brother, who had enlisted in the army rather than watch their father drink himself to death over the loss of the family business, and wondered if he would understand the choices she had made in his absence. The silver locket seemed to grow heavier as the appointed meeting time approached, its weight a constant reminder that some burdens could only be lifted by carrying them to completion regardless of personal cost. Her phone rang with an unknown number, the kind of call she had been expecting since Alexander discovered her true identity. "You've been very busy, Miss Grant." His voice carried the same casual arrogance that had characterized their previous encounters, though she detected an underlying tension that suggested cracks in his legendary composure. "I have to admit, I underestimated your capabilities. The daughter of a failed textile worker, hiding among my staff while orchestrating my destruction. It's almost Shakespearean in its dramatic irony." His attempt at literary analysis fell flat, revealing the shallow education that money could buy but never truly provide. And she found herself smiling at his inability to recognize the fundamental difference between vengeance and justice. "I prefer to think of it as poetic justice, Alexander," she replied, using his first name with deliberate familiarity that would remind him of their previous relationship when she had been someone whose opinions mattered. "William Hayes taught me that the truth always finds a way to surface, even when powerful men try to bury it along with the people who threaten their carefully constructed lies." The mention of her mentor's name seemed to strike home, and she heard his breathing change in a way that suggested the conversation was affecting him more deeply than his casual tone indicated. The game was entering its final phase, and both players understood that tonight's confrontation would determine not only their individual fates, but the future of everyone whose lives had been touched by Alexander's corporate predation. The storm outside seemed to mirror the turbulence building toward its climax, as Sophia prepared for the meeting that would either complete her mission or end her life. Alexander was desperate now, cornered like any predator when its territory was threatened. And desperate men were capable of anything when they had nothing left to lose. She checked the small recording device hidden in her locket one final time, ensuring it would capture whatever confession or threat Alexander might offer when they faced each other in the place where William Hayes had dreamed of reforming corporate America from within. The circle was closing, and tomorrow the world would know whether justice was truly possible in a system designed to protect wealth at any cost, or whether some monsters were too powerful to face consequences for their crimes. The 62nd floor of Vaughn Tower felt like a mausoleum after hours. Its executive suites dark and silent, except for the whisper of climate control systems and the distant hum of traffic from the street below. Sophia emerged from the service elevator with the confidence of someone who belonged in these sacred halls of corporate power, her appearance transformed by the professional attire she had worn during her years as William Hayes's executive assistant. The silver locket lay heavy against her chest, its familiar weight both comforting and ominous, as she approached the office where her mentor had spent his final days gathering evidence against the man who would eventually kill him. Security cameras tracked her movement through the corridors, but the guards monitoring them saw only another late-working executive rather than the ghost who had haunted their systems for months. Hayes's office remained exactly as he had left it 3 years ago, preserved like a shrine to corporate respectability while serving as a monument to Alexander's arrogance. The mahogany desk still bore the faint ring stains from Hayes's coffee cup, and his diplomas hung on the wall in their original positions, creating an illusion of permanence that made his absence all the more poignant. Sophia ran her fingers along the leather-bound volumes that lined his bookshelf, remembering countless conversations about business ethics and corporate responsibility that had shaped her understanding of right and wrong in the corporate world. Hayes had believed that capitalism could be reformed from within by principled leaders who refused to compromise their values for profit, a naive optimism that had ultimately cost him his life but inspired her quest for justice. The door opened behind her with the soft whisper of expensive hinges, and Alexander Vaughn entered the office with the predatory grace that had made him legendary in business circles. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain. His tie was slightly askew, his hair mussed from running anxious fingers through it, and his eyes held the wild look of a cornered animal that had finally realized the trap was closing. "You've caused quite a stir," he said, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding authority as he surveyed the office where his former mentor had plotted against him. "Federal prosecutors, congressional inquiries, media investigations. I have to admit, your timing is impeccable." The compliment was delivered with the kind of grudging respect that predators showed to worthy opponents, though she could see the calculation in his eyes as he searched for weaknesses to exploit. Sophia turned to face him with the composed dignity of someone who had spent years preparing for this confrontation, her posture straight and her gaze steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "William Hayes deserved better than to die in a suspicious car accident just days before he planned to expose your crimes," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute moral certainty. "He believed in redemption, in the possibility that even corrupted institutions could be reformed by people with the courage to do what was right. You killed him for that faith, and now you're going to pay for it." The words hung in the air between them like a formal declaration of war, and she watched his expression shift from arrogance to something approaching genuine concern as he realized the full scope of her knowledge. Alexander moved to Hayes's desk with the restless energy of a man accustomed to controlling every aspect of his environment, his fingers drumming against the mahogany surface in a nervous rhythm that betrayed his deteriorating composure. "Hayes was a dinosaur who couldn't adapt to modern business realities," he said, attempting to regain the psychological advantage through casual dismissal of his victim's importance. "His death was an accident, a tragic coincidence that you've twisted into some conspiracy theory because you can't accept that your family's business failed due to market forces beyond anyone's control." The lie came easily, supported by years of practice and legal coaching, but his body language told a different story as sweat beaded on his forehead despite the office's perfectly controlled temperature. The silver locket pulsed against Sophia's chest like a second heartbeat as she reached inside her jacket to retrieve the micro-recorder that would capture his confession for posterity. "I have William's complete files," she said, producing a flash drive that contained enough evidence to destroy not only Alexander, but the entire network of corporate criminals who had enabled his activities. "Financial records, email correspondence, meeting notes that document every illegal transaction you've conducted over the past 5 years. The FBI already has copies, of course, But I thought you might want to see exactly how thorough William was in documenting your activities before he died. The flash drive caught the office's ambient lighting like a tiny star, its innocent appearance belying the devastating power contained within its memory chips. Alexander's mask of corporate composure finally slipped completely, revealing the frightened child beneath the expensive suits and carefully cultivated public image. "What do you want?" he demanded, his voice cracking with desperation as he realized the magnitude of the evidence arrayed against him. "Money? Position? Name your price, and I'll make it happen. Everyone has something they want, something that matters more than abstract principles." His offer revealed the fundamental poverty of imagination that characterized men who had never experienced genuine hardship, the belief that money could solve any problem and purchase any loyalty. Sophia almost felt sorry for him in that moment, recognizing the pathetic figure he had become now that his power was stripped away and he faced consequences for the first time in his privileged life. She shook her head with the sad certainty of someone who had learned that some wounds could never be healed by material compensation, her gaze never leaving his face as she watched him process the reality of his situation. "There's nothing you can offer that would bring back my parents, Alexander. Nothing that would undo the damage you've caused to thousands of families whose only crime was trusting that American businesses operated with basic human decency. William Hayes died believing that justice was possible in this system, and I intend to prove he was right, even if it destroys us both." The recording device in her pocket captured every word with digital precision, creating an official record that would become evidence in the federal prosecution that would define his legacy for generations to come. The storm outside reached its crescendo as lightning illuminated the office in stark black and white, casting dramatic shadows that made both figures appear larger than life in their final confrontation. Alexander's phone buzzed insistently with calls from lawyers and crisis management consultants, but he ignored them all as he stared at the woman who had orchestrated his downfall from the shadows of his own empire. "You realize this destroys you too," he said with a last desperate attempt at psychological manipulation. "No one will ever trust you in the business world again. You'll be marked as a whistleblower, a troublemaker who can't be counted on to maintain corporate loyalty." His words carried the weight of genuine threat, but they also revealed his complete inability to understand the motivations of someone who valued justice over personal advancement. Sophia smiled with the serene confidence of someone who had already counted the cost and found it acceptable, her hand moving instinctively to the silver locket that had guided her through 3 years of patient planning. "I stopped caring about my corporate career the day you had William Hayes murdered," she replied, her voice carrying the finality of absolute conviction. "Some things matter more than professional success, Alexander. Some debts can only be paid in full, regardless of personal cost." The recording device captured his sharp intake of breath as the implications of her words sank in, and she knew that tomorrow the world would hear exactly what kind of man Alexander Vaughn truly was beneath his carefully constructed public persona. Justice was finally within reach, and she intended to savor every moment of his fall from grace. The emergency board meeting convened at dawn in the Vaughn Corporation's Crisis Management Center, a windowless conference room designed for situations that required absolute privacy and maximum security. Sophia watched the proceedings through hacked security cameras from the safety of her car parked 3 blocks away, her laptop screen displaying the faces of board members who had spent years enabling Alexander's criminal activities without asking uncomfortable questions about the source of their enormous profits. The federal raid had shattered their carefully maintained ignorance, forcing them to confront the reality that their golden goose had been laying eggs filled with poison that would soon contaminate everyone associated with the company. She counted at least 6 directors whose personal finances were so intertwined with Alexander's schemes that federal prosecutors would certainly pursue conspiracy charges once they finished analyzing the evidence she had provided. Alexander entered the conference room like a condemned man walking to his execution, his usual commanding presence replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who had spent the night realizing his empire was beyond salvation. The federal prosecutors had moved with devastating efficiency, freezing assets and securing court orders that would prevent him from transferring wealth to offshore accounts where it might escape justice. His team of crisis management consultants flanked him like bodyguards, their expensive suits and practiced expressions of confidence unable to mask the fundamental hopelessness of their situation. The recording device Sophia had worn during their confrontation had captured everything. His admission of knowledge about Hayes's murder, his attempts to bribe federal investigators, and most damning of all, his casual dismissal of the families whose lives he had destroyed in pursuit of greater profits. The board's discussion devolved into the kind of vicious infighting that characterized any group of predators when their survival was threatened, each member attempting to distance themselves from Alexander while positioning for advantage in whatever corporate structure emerged from the wreckage. Sophia felt no sympathy for their panic, remembering how eagerly they had approved every merger and acquisition that expanded their personal wealth at the expense of working families like hers. These titans of industry had built their fortunes on the systematic exploitation of American workers, closing factories and outsourcing jobs while awarding themselves bonuses that exceeded the annual GDP of small countries. Justice was a dish best served cold, and she had spent 3 years ensuring it would arrive at precisely the right temperature to maximize its impact. Her secure phone buzzed with a text message from Ryan Ellis, who had positioned himself outside the building to monitor federal activity and provide early warning if Alexander attempted to flee. FBI is setting up a perimeter, the message read, accompanied by photos showing unmarked vehicles taking strategic positions around the block. They're not taking any chances with him running. The images confirmed what Sophia had suspected. Federal prosecutors were treating this as a high-profile case that would define their careers, which meant they would pursue charges with the kind of relentless determination usually reserved for terrorism investigations. Alexander's wealth and political connections would delay the inevitable but not prevent it, and every day of legal maneuvering would only provide more opportunities for additional evidence to surface. The conference room's atmosphere grew increasingly toxic as board members began openly discussing the possibility of removing Alexander from all corporate positions to protect their own interests. Years of loyalty and mutual benefit evaporated in the face of federal indictments that could result in decades of prison time, and she watched with fascination as corporate solidarity crumbled under pressure like a house of cards in a hurricane. Alexander's attempts to maintain control became increasingly desperate, his voice rising to near shouting as he threatened board members with exposure of their own complicity in his schemes. The irony was exquisite. The very leverage he had used to ensure their cooperation was now being turned against him as they calculated the odds of survival in a post-Alexander world. Her laptop chimed with an incoming call from a number she didn't recognize, and Sophia hesitated before answering, knowing that Alexander was capable of anything when cornered like a wounded animal. "Miss Grant," an unfamiliar voice said, carrying the kind of professional authority that immediately identified the speaker as law enforcement. "This is Special Agent Matthews with the FBI. We need to talk." The words sent a chill down her spine, though she had always known this moment would come eventually. Her activities had been too extensive and too sophisticated to escape federal notice indefinitely, and she could only hope that her cooperation in exposing Alexander's crimes would earn her some consideration when it came time to face her own charges for computer fraud and corporate espionage. The agent's tone remained professional as he continued, but she detected an underlying respect that suggested federal investigators appreciated the quality of evidence she had provided against their primary target. "We're aware of your role in bringing this information to light," Agent Matthews said, his words carefully chosen to avoid making any commitments while establishing the foundation for potential cooperation. "There are procedures we need to follow, questions that need to be answered. But I want you to know that the Bureau understands the difference between criminal activity and public service. Your actions have exposed a conspiracy that threatened the integrity of American financial markets." The implicit offer was clear: cooperation in exchange for leniency, though she harbored no illusions about avoiding consequences for her illegal activities. Through her laptop screen, she watched Alexander's final moments of corporate power as the board voted unanimously to suspend his authority, pending resolution of the federal investigation. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, denial, and finally a kind of hollow acceptance that his carefully constructed world was collapsing beyond repair. Security guards appeared at the conference room door, not to protect him, but to escort him from the building as federal agents waited in the lobby with arrest warrants that would mark the beginning of his legal odyssey. The silver locket seemed to pulse against her chest as she witnessed the moment of justice she had worked 3 years to achieve, a validation of William Hayes's faith that truth would ultimately prevail over corruption. The storm that had been building all morning finally broke as Sophia closed her laptop and prepared to surrender herself to federal custody, rain drumming against her car's windshield like nature's applause for the drama that had just concluded. She thought of her family's textile mill, shuttered and abandoned but somehow vindicated by the night's events, and of her parents who had died believing that hard work and integrity were meaningless in a world dominated by corporate predators. Alexander Vaughn would face justice for his crimes, and his conviction would send shockwaves through boardrooms across America as other executives realized that wealth and influence were not sufficient protection against determined investigators armed with irrefutable evidence. Her phone buzzed one final time with a message from Ryan Ellis, containing a single photograph that brought tears to her eyes despite everything she had endured over the past 3 years. The image showed Alexander being led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, and his famous composure finally shattered by the reality of consequences he had never imagined possible. For William Hayes, Ryan's accompanying text read, acknowledging the man whose death had set these events in motion and whose memory had sustained her through the darkest moments of her quest for justice. The circle was closing at last, and tomorrow the world would know that even the most powerful predators could be brought low by someone they never saw coming. Someone who understood that the greatest weapon against corruption was the truth wielded by people with nothing left to lose. The federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan buzzed with media attention as Alexander Vaughn's perp walk became the lead story on every news channel, his handcuffed figure a stark symbol of how far the mighty could fall when justice finally caught up with their crimes. Sophia watched the coverage from the FBI field office where she had spent the morning being debriefed by investigators who seemed genuinely impressed by the sophistication of her 3-year operation against one of America's most powerful corporate dynasties. Special Agent Matthews had been surprisingly respectful during the interview process, acknowledging that her illegal activities had exposed crimes far more serious than her own technical violations of federal computer fraud statutes. The immunity agreement they offered was comprehensive but came with conditions: full cooperation, complete disclosure, and testimony that would ensure Alexander's conviction on charges that could result in life imprisonment. The silver locket lay open on the conference table between them, its hidden micro SD card finally revealed after 3 years of patient concealment against her heart. The device contained William Hayes's complete files on Alexander's criminal enterprise, including audio recordings of conversations that proved premeditation in Hayes's murder, and financial documents that traced money laundering operations across multiple international jurisdictions. Agent Matthews handled the evidence with the reverence due to a smoking gun, knowing that its contents would provide federal prosecutors with everything they needed to secure convictions against not only Alexander but the entire network of executives and board members who had facilitated his activities. Justice had been a long time coming, but its arrival was proving more thorough than even Sophia had dared to hope. Ryan Ellis entered the conference room carrying coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose undercover work had finally borne fruit. His true identity as an FBI agent no longer requiring concealment. The initial arraignment went exactly as expected, he reported, settling into the chair beside Sophia with the easy familiarity of someone who had shared her burden for longer than anyone realized. Alexander's legal team is already talking about plea negotiations, but the prosecutors aren't interested in anything less than full admission of guilt and complete cooperation in identifying other victims of his schemes. The news brought a smile to Sophia's face, the first genuine expression of happiness she had experienced since the day William Hayes died in that hospital room while whispering his final instructions for completing their shared mission. The conference room's windows offered a commanding view of the city where Sophia's family had once prospered before Alexander's corporate predation destroyed their textile business, and she found herself remembering happier times when American manufacturing still meant something beyond quarterly profit statements and shareholder value. Her father had built Grant Textiles from nothing, creating jobs for hundreds of workers while maintaining the kind of ethical standards that had become quaint anachronisms in the modern business world. Alexander's systematic destruction of companies like theirs represented more than simple greed. It was an assault on the fundamental values that had made America an industrial powerhouse, a cancer that had metastasized throughout the corporate world until decent people like William Hayes found themselves fighting hopeless battles against institutionalized corruption. Agent Matthews produced a tablet displaying financial records that showed the true scope of Alexander's criminal enterprise. Numbers so large they seemed abstract, until he began explaining their real-world impact on pension funds and retirement accounts that had trusted Vaughn Corporation with their investments. We estimate that his activities cost American investors over $8 billion in losses, the agent explained, his professional demeanor unable to completely mask his personal disgust at the scale of the fraud they had uncovered. Families who saved for decades saw their retirement dreams evaporate, while Alexander used their money to fund a lifestyle that would have made Roman emperors jealous. The human cost of corporate crime was rarely quantified so precisely, and Sophia felt a deep satisfaction knowing that her efforts had prevented even greater losses by exposing the fraud before it could spread further. The door opened to admit Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, whose reputation for aggressive prosecution of white-collar crime had made her legendary among federal investigators who specialized in corporate fraud cases. "Miss Grant," Walsh said with the kind of respectful authority that acknowledged Sophia's crucial role in building the case, while maintaining appropriate legal distance. "I want to personally thank you for your cooperation in what may become the most significant corporate fraud prosecution in federal history. Your evidence has given us everything we need to ensure that Alexander Vaughn spends the rest of his life in federal prison." The prosecutor's words carried the weight of official recognition that justice would be served, validation of the 3-year journey that had transformed Sophia from a grieving victim into an agent of accountability. Through the conference room's windows, she could see protesters gathering outside the courthouse, their signs demanding justice for the thousands of families whose lives had been destroyed by Alexander's corporate predation. The crowd included former employees of companies he had acquired and destroyed, retirees whose pension funds had been looted, and small business owners who had been driven into bankruptcy by his anti-competitive practices. Their presence transformed the federal prosecution from an abstract legal proceeding into a popular movement for corporate accountability, proving that William Hayes's faith in the American people had been justified despite the corruption that had infected their institutions. Justice was finally arriving, not just for Sophia's family, but for everyone who had suffered under Alexander's reign of corporate terror. As the afternoon sun slanted through the conference room's windows, casting long shadows that seemed to represent the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, Sophia felt the weight of 3 years lifting from her shoulders like a physical burden being removed. The silver locket, no longer needed to conceal evidence, had been returned to its original purpose as a memorial to the mother who had taught her that some fights were worth any sacrifice. Alexander Vaughn would face the full consequences of his actions, and his conviction would send shockwaves through boardrooms across America as other executives realized that wealth and political connections were insufficient protection against determined prosecutors armed with irrefutable evidence of criminal activity. Agent Matthews closed his briefing folder with the satisfaction of someone who had helped expose one of the most sophisticated corporate fraud schemes in federal history, his respect for Sophia evident in every gesture and word. "There's one more thing," he said, producing a document that bore the official seal of the Department of Justice. "The Attorney General has authorized a special recognition for your contribution to this investigation. It's not something we do often, but your actions have saved countless Americans from financial ruin while exposing systemic corruption that threatened the integrity of our entire financial system." The commendation represented more than official gratitude. It was acknowledgement that sometimes justice required citizens to take extraordinary risks when their institutions failed to protect them from predators who operated with impunity. The federal courthouse bell tower chimed 6 o'clock as Sophia prepared to leave the building where Alexander's fate had been sealed, her mission finally complete after 3 years of patient planning and careful execution. Tomorrow, the newspapers would tell the story of how a corporate whistleblower had brought down one of America's most powerful dynasties. but they would never fully capture the personal cost of seeking justice in a system designed to protect wealth at any price. William Hayes could finally rest in peace, knowing that his death had not been in vain, and that the evidence he died protecting had ultimately exposed the corruption he had devoted his final years to fighting. The circle was complete, and justice had been served not through vengeance, but through the patient application of truth against lies that had seemed impregnable until someone with nothing left to lose decided they were worth challenging. 6 months later, the boardroom on the 68th floor of what was now the Hayes Grant Corporate Ethics Center hummed with a different kind of energy than it had during Alexander Vaughn's reign of corporate predation. Sophia sat at the head of the mahogany conference table where she had once served champagne to the architects of her family's destruction. Her transformation from invisible waitress to interim CEO complete in ways that even she had not imagined possible when this journey began. The federal investigation had revealed such extensive corruption within Vaughn Corporation that a complete restructuring had been necessary, with court-appointed administrators bringing in new leadership committed to the ethical business practices that William Hayes had died trying to implement. Her appointment as interim CEO had been unanimous among the remaining board members, who recognized that her intimate knowledge of the company's operations and unquestioned integrity made her uniquely qualified to guide its transformation. The silver locket rested against her chest where it had always belonged, no longer concealing evidence, but serving as a reminder of the mother who had taught her that justice was worth any sacrifice, and the mentor who had believed corporate America could be reformed from within. Grant Textiles had been one of the first companies to receive compensation from the Vaughn Corporation Victim Restitution Fund, though no amount of money could truly restore what had been lost when her family's business was systematically destroyed. Her father had lived long enough to see Alexander's conviction and the restoration of their family's reputation, his final months filled with the kind of peace that came from vindication after years of believing he had failed as a businessman and provider. The textile mill would remain closed. Too much time had passed, and too many skilled workers had moved on. But the symbolic victory was worth more than any financial settlement. The morning's agenda focused on implementing the comprehensive ethics reforms that federal prosecutors had mandated as part of the corporation's plea agreement, changes that would transform how American businesses operated far beyond the immediate impact on this single company. Every major contract would be subject to independent oversight. Executive compensation would be tied to measurable social impact rather than pure profit maximization, and whistleblower protections would be strengthened to prevent future retaliation against employees who discovered illegal activities. Sophia had insisted on naming the program after William Hayes, ensuring that his memory would be permanently associated with the corporate accountability movement he had sacrificed everything to advance. The irony was perfect. The company that had killed him to protect its secrets was now pioneering the transparency initiatives he had dreamed of implementing. Ryan Ellis entered the boardroom carrying the morning's newspapers, their headlines dominated by coverage of Alexander's sentencing hearing, where he had finally admitted his role in Hayes's murder in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Federal prosecutors had accepted his plea bargain reluctantly, understanding that a living witness to corporate corruption was more valuable than a martyred symbol of executive excess. But they had insisted on a sentence that would ensure he died in federal prison. The man who had once commanded this room with absolute authority would spend his remaining decades in solitary confinement, protected from the general prison population who had little sympathy for wealthy criminals who had stolen their retirement savings and destroyed their communities through predatory business practices. The conference room's windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, where the effects of the Vaughn Corporation investigation continued to ripple through the financial district like shockwaves from an earthquake that had fundamentally altered the corporate landscape. Congressional hearings had led to new federal legislation strengthening securities fraud penalties, while state prosecutors across the country had opened investigations into companies with suspicious similarities to Alexander's criminal enterprise. Sophia had testified before multiple congressional committees, her story serving as a powerful illustration of why stronger protections were needed for corporate whistleblowers who risked everything to expose institutional corruption. The scared young woman who had been escorted from this building by security guards had evolved into a national symbol of corporate accountability, proof that even the most powerful predators could be brought low by someone they never saw coming. Her assistant knocked softly on the conference room door before entering with the day's secure mail, including a handwritten letter from one of Alexander's victims whose pension fund had been restored through the federal restitution process. "Thank you for giving me hope that justice is still possible in America," the letter read, its simple words carrying more weight than any corporate award or media recognition she had received. "My grandchildren will grow up in a better world because someone had the courage to fight for what was right." The correspondence represented hundreds of similar messages from families whose lives had been destroyed by Alexander's greed, but who now saw their faith in American institutions restored by the knowledge that criminals would face consequences regardless of their wealth or political connections. The afternoon brought a video conference with textile workers in North Carolina, whose factory had been one of Alexander's first acquisitions. Their jobs saved by the new management's commitment to domestic manufacturing and fair labor practices. Their faces on the screen reminded Sophia of her own father's workers, skilled craftspeople whose expertise had been considered disposable by executives who viewed human beings as nothing more than line items on quarterly profit statements. The Hayes Grant Corporate Ethics Center was pioneering a new model of stakeholder capitalism that prioritized long-term sustainability over short-term profits, proving that businesses could prosper while treating workers, customers, and communities with dignity and respect. It was the kind of company William Hayes had envisioned, and she felt his presence in every decision that put people before profits. As the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the conference room where the story had begun, Sophia reflected on the journey that had transformed her from a powerless victim into an agent of systemic change, whose actions would influence corporate governance for generations to come. The silver locket caught the evening light as she prepared to leave the office, its familiar weight a constant reminder that justice was possible when people were willing to risk everything for principles larger than themselves. Alexander Vaughn's empire had crumbled, but from its ashes had risen something better, a company committed to the ethical practices he had mocked, led by the woman he had dismissed as beneath his notice. The security guard who had once escorted her from this building now nodded respectfully as she passed through the lobby, his recognition a small but meaningful symbol of how completely the power dynamics had shifted since that night when she first returned as a waitress seeking revenge. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in the ongoing work of corporate reform, but tonight she could rest knowing that William Hayes' sacrifice had not been in vain, and that her family's suffering had ultimately contributed to a transformation that would protect countless others from similar predation. The cycle of corporate corruption had been broken, at least in this corner of American business, and the woman who had seemed invisible to those who wielded power had proven that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones you never bothered to see. Justice had been served not through vengeance, but through the patient application of truth against institutional lies, proving that even in a system designed to protect wealth and privilege, determined individuals could still change the world when they understood that some principles were worth any sacrifice. The silver locket would continue to remind her of the mother who had taught her those lessons and the mentor who had died believing they were true. But now it also symbolized hope for a future where corporate power would be balanced by accountability, and where the American dream could flourish without requiring the destruction of those who dared to pursue it honestly. The transformation of Sophia Grant from invisible waitress to corporate reformer proves that in America, justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's simply justice preparing to arrive with the devastating precision that only patient planning and unwavering determination can achieve. In a world where wealth seems to guarantee immunity from consequences, her story reminds us that the most powerful weapon against corruption remains the truth wielded by someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to fight for.